March 2020, when COVID hit or struck us, I remember being in my workplace. I'm a manager for health and social care. I'm also registered blind and I live in Stevenston. I remember being asked to come over to a meeting at headquarters and instructed that we may have to work differently, and I would advise our staff about the COVID virus coming into the country, to explain to them the risks associated with that and how we may have to do things differently and may have to work from home. And I remember leaving Irvine to come back to my office where I work in the town hall in Saltcoats, and asked all my staff to go into a meeting room and explain to them what I had just been told. And quite honestly, that journey from Irvine to Stevenston, I've got no recollection of it. It just seemed to be a bit of a blur. But I remember explaining to all my staff and my team what I'd just been told about the risks and associated and the worries and the expectations of the COVID. And I'll never forget some of the staff's reactions. There were some in tears, there were some in disbelief. I think I was in total disbelief myself, and I just couldn't believe it. And I remember leaving my office that night to go through the building to get a taxi home, and it was like the Marie Celeste, the building was almost empty. They changed the work practices over the first year where people had to work from home. The difficult thing for me being registered blind and I didn't have a laptop, I had to work in the office, but for safety reasons it was all risk assessed and I work in a room on my own, and as long as I opened the window it was fine. But as you can imagine, being visually impaired, I required a fair bit of support from clerical etc, and they were in a room adjacent to me. However, they were all working in a rota and there was very little staff in the building. And it was strange because you're so used to a busy place, a buzz about the place, people you could just go and ask questions to, and it was really a challenge and difficult way for me to work, because overnight, from going from Windows 7 to Office 365 and using things like Microsoft Teams for meetings was a complete new environment to me, and I felt de-skilled. I really felt as if I was out of my depth with that type of way of working, and I required some training on the new way of working. But the difficulty thing, the main trainer for me was an organisation based in East Kilbride, and they weren't doing face-to-face training because of the restrictions, and it made life very, very difficult, quite challenging for me to work. As the time progressed and we realised this wasn't going to go away overnight or in a matter of days or weeks, the gyms closed, and I remember being in the gym one evening. It was a Thursday night, again, it's a night I'll never forget. I've been registered blind, you require a bit of support for the instructors to set machines and orientate around the buildings. I remember that night being told the gym was going to close for I think it was a period of weeks or months, and we were all in disbelief, and we all shared mobile phone numbers and says we would keep in touch. But as a person that likes to go to exercise and keep fit, I can't just walk out my front door and go for a walk or a run or go jogging. So I remembered a bit just before the pandemic hit, and the year before it, one of my colleagues, David Reid, who works in the Travel Smart section, did a demonstration about e-bikes, and he demonstrated a tandem to me. So I contacted him to ask him if the tandem was available for me to borrow in order for me to be able to do exercise. Because the difficult thing for me as well was my partner Alison, she works away from home 4 days a week in the island of Arran in a care home, and I'd spend 4 days a week on my own, and most nights after my work I would go to the gym, but I just couldn't do that because the gyms were closed. So we contacted David. I think COVID hit in about the March time, and I contacted David around May, June to see if I could borrow the tandem, and it was agreed in one condition, that I could meet him in an outside space and somebody could assist me to collect the bike. So my cousin had his own company at the time and he had his own van, so we arranged to meet David outside, and I borrowed a tandem, which was absolutely life changing for me. And the next thing I had to identify was who was going to drive the tandem, because being registered blind I just couldn't go. I couldn't obviously needed a pilot, we call them the pilots in the front of the tandem. So one of the nights I was going home from my work, the driver that night, he was a very keen cyclist, and he used to talk to me a lot about his cycling endeavours. A good friend of mine now says to me, I spoke to him about the tandem and asked him if he was willing to be a volunteer. I was looking for somebody a couple of days a week to take me out cycling, and he asked me to show him the tandem, which was just inside my front door, and I opened the door and pointed it to it, and he told me we'd get him the following evening. Strange in reflection over the last couple of years, the first time we cycled round Arran, everywhere was closed. Very limited. We were allowed to use the ferry, but everything was very limited. The second time we cycled round Arran, everything was open again 2 years later. There was less restrictions. So myself and John, my pilot, and David Reid from the Travel Starts, were going to cycle round Arran on this day in August. It was a lovely morning. But Alison, my partner, says to me, "Would you be able to get to a cafe or a shop?" And I said, "I'm not quite sure yet. I wasn't all that sure." So Alison, fortunately, that morning had made a significant number of chicken sandwiches and made us up bottles of isotonic drinks up, and we put them in our panniers. And the four of us cycled around the island. We did the first 18 mile. We went to a thing at the opposite end of the island. It's called the Velo Cafe, where it's famous for all the cyclists. When we got there that early, it wasn't open. So we decided to cycle on another 18 mile. By that time we were all absolutely ravenous. And we wanted to get into the Macri Hotel in Arran. But they said they weren't allowing any visitors in because it was open, only open for the guests of a wedding. So therefore that was us. We cycled half the island without anything to eat. And I'd say to the guys, if you get into my panniers, you might get a bit of a surprise. And I think it's the first time I've ever seen 4 guys nearly fighting over chicken sandwiches. But it was great to see there was less restrictions, because when we got onto the ferry that day on the way home last year, John Armour says to me, "Danny, the bar's open this time, you'll get a pint." So he got me a pint, and then he went to the toilet. And he came back from the toilet and he says, "Danny, where's your pint?" I says, "I've drunk it." It was a great feeling sitting in that boat, coming back over the island of Arran, having cycled in it, and feeling there was people on the boat, there was people around the place, there was a wee bit more buzz about the place, and people enjoying themselves, and people seemed to be making more noise, and the place seemed more lively, and people were chatting again. It was great. I feel how life has changed over the last couple of years through COVID is, I think the whole digital transformation has excluded people who are already marginalised for society. They're further marginalised, and I think the whole digital evolution, we really need to think about how accessible some of that is. And I remember once being in getting a medical appointment, and you had to wait at the door to get your permission to come in, and an elderly gentleman came in at the back of me, and he was asking for an appointment to see the doctor. And the receptionist asked the older gentleman how we get in. He didn't have an appointment. He says, "I can't get through on the phone." He says, you can book an appointment online." He says, "I don't have a computer." And then he even said he couldn't get through on the phone because he didn't have a phone. And I thought how difficult it must have been for some people, and very, very challenging for some individuals. Very difficult. And my brother himself was on the shielding list. He had asthma. And I'll never forget his 30th wedding anniversary. I got him some gifts online. And because he was shielding, he wasn't supposed to have any visitors, and he couldn't go to the shops, he couldn't go anywhere. So I got a taxi to his house, met him in his front door, and gave him his gift. Him and his wife their gifts for their 30th anniversary, and then went home. I thought, what a way to spend an anniversary. Well, as restrictions changed and as the time went on and the years passed, health and safety risk assessments carried out, and we were allowed a certain amount of people back in the building. And people started to work in a sort of hybrid way of working from home and working in the building. But we're now back to people visiting people, service users in their homes. But we're now still in a hybrid way of working, and I'm permitted to have 50% of my team in at any one time, which I still find very difficult, a difficult way of working, and quite challenging. And you've really got to try and use your imagination for other ways of working and keeping in touch with your staff. But now I feel a lot better that restrictions are lifted, because when I'm having supervision now, I can have it face to face and have somebody in my room, where I think you get a better sense of how somebody is and how they are with their workload, etc. Where you're managing a wee face on a screen or somebody at the other end of a phone, you don't really get a true reflection or a true picture of the person. How I feel now, today, it's great. I'm sitting in my office talking, having this interview. I've had staff in today chatting face to face. I'm having team meetings, but it's all in the room, sitting around the table. It's great to get your team all together I was at the gym again, as I say, at the gym last night. Life is almost back to normal for me. But a personal view, and it's not everybody's view, I would still love to have the ratio of 1-to-1 desk for all my staff and have all the team in at the same time, because when you have new staff members starting, it can prove to be a bit of a challenge with induction times and stuff. Although I've got a very cooperative and a very understanding team, I still wish I could turn the clock back to where we all were 3 years ago and that everybody could come into the building. Do I think we're productive? Do I think we're less productive, more productive? I think people are still getting on with their work, and I think people are still working very hard, and we're still managing the service, but I still am a bit old fashioned and I prefer people to be at their work every day and in with their teams and sharing. But other people have different views, and people are managing their job and they're doing really well, and we're providing good services. But where we are with life, I feel life's probably, people are feeling better, but I still think it's a significant impact on people's mental health and their well-being. You can hear the stories of some kids still don't want to go to school, feeling anxious about going to school. I think it's great that people can move around now, people can get their holidays, people can visit their families and their friends and get on with their lives. It must be really a lot more a positive experience for people, for their physical and mental well-being. I'm certainly enjoying the gym, and as I said earlier, David Reed and the tandem, the Travel Smart scheme, changed my life, and it's something it's a really good hobby, and I've been a really good friend of it, and it's something that I certainly won't be giving up for a long time.